Welcome to the Echo Oscar Delta podcast, where we talk to Navy EOD techs and hear the stories that they want to share. All ideas, thoughts, and statements are those of the guest and the host of Echo Oscar Delta, and not of Navy EOD or Navy as a whole. Today on the podcast, we have Duane Oliveira. He retired as a Master Chief in EOD after 31 years, did multiple Westpac deployments, Med deployment, Afghan a few times, and then I'm sure plenty of other trips around the world. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is good, man. I ran into you, man, let's see. The last time when I was leaving the training unit, you were a detailer, and you got me my orders to Mobile Unit 6. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, no worries, man. I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit more later, but the detailer job is as painful as it could be. I have to say, to end, the career doing that, and being able to, help out most people most of the time, that was it was pretty good, man. It definitely probably probably had fewer friends coming out of that job than I had going in, but that's just the way it is, right?
Yep. You can't please everybody all the time, right?
No, sir, you cannot.
So coming into EOD, did you come straight into EOD, or what was your route to finding EOD?
Yeah, I did, man. I signed up under the delayed entry program, and back in the day, they used to have what was called a dive farer program, and it was for guys coming into EOD, Navy diving, and SEALs. Basically high school kids. So I signed up like probably 6 months before I graduated from high school, and then I left. 10 days after graduation, I was in boot camp, man. And so I had
Nice.
my 18th birthday at boot camp, and then from there, that back in the day, as I'm sure some of the other guys talked to, and even yourself, you had like a regular A school that you would go to, and then dive school, and then EOD school, and you know when I first came in with the original 5331 or the EOD assistant program. I went to school actually as a weapons technician, or WT, which I'm pretty sure they stopped those in the Navy back in like the early 90s.
Yeah.
And then the dive school didn't have like the EOD diving curriculum back then. It was basically the second class diver training was all the guys going into EOD went to that, except for my class, because dive school was full in Panama City. So they decided they were going to try a pilot, and they sent a bunch of us out to Hawaii, actually, to Ford Island, where they had a dive school out there. And it was mainly about 50% like divers coming through, but they also had like the submarine divers that would come through to get their scuba qual. And then the Marine Force Recon guys would come through there to do their scuba qual as well. So my class ended up, I was in class with a bunch of regular like Navy EOD assistant pipeline guys, and I got kicked out of that class pretty much day two, and scrubbed the master diver's fish tank for about a month, and then I got classed up with basically a whole platoon of guys going through recon scuba course, and like 2 submarine divers. So that was my dive school class, and then
That's pretty cool.
From there I went to Eglin, and then back then it was it was good, man. I mean, the EOD school, as I'm sure you've heard, back then half of it or most of it was up at Indian Head.
Yep.
So at Eglin, you just did basically, I guess, what we would call core now, and demo, and BC, and something else, and that was pretty much it, man. And then you'd go out to your mobile unit for a couple of years, and if you didn't get kicked out of the Navy or booted out of the community, then you'd go back to Indian Head and finish up your training.
Gotcha. The more I hear about the 31 program, the more I think that's an awesome program. Like, I wish we kind of had that now. I think it would actually potentially solve some of the things, some of the issues that there are right now.
I don't disagree with you, man. When I finally retired, I was on a retirement camping trip, and I actually stopped through Tampa when Jamie Hurdell was down at CENTCOM at the time, and Jamie and I had not come in the Navy the exact time together. We were about a week apart, but we did link up at Eglin, and then again later at Indian Head. And anyway, when I stopped through there in Tampa back in the summer of 2020, Jamie and I were sitting back on the porch having a beer and just kind of laughing about how, man, the 31 program was good, and then we definitely were able to dump some folks that didn't belong in the community and not have them go back to EOD school to finish up. And then there were guys like Jamie and I that did our best to get in as much trouble as possible, and somehow luckily were able to make it back to EOD school, and then went on to spend the next 25, 26 years, whatever it was, by the time we got out of Indian Head, and in the Navy, and both of us ended up doing okay, and he and I are still friends now, and we joke about it too, because the only reason he and I are probably still friends is because we never actually had to work together.
The off-duty personalities get along, but the on-duty might have butted heads a little bit.
We definitely did not see eye to eye in a work setting on occasion, and I say that jokingly. He, like I said, he and I still talk. He called me a couple weeks ago just to check in, and so it's good to be able to connect with some of those dudes that you've known for literally your entire adult life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I, I understand there's a little joking, but on the serious note too, it is super healthy. I was just down in Florida doing some stuff, for the community, and there's, man, I don't know, eight or 10 mash techs in the room, and there gets some heated debates, but then at the end, everybody's like, okay, we have agreed that if these debates happen, which they will,
Yep.
everybody's going to decide, okay, what is the tiebreaker, and then everybody's good with that decision, and next subject. It's good. That's how we move things along, though. That's
Yeah, no, that's a fact, and it's part of it. I think is that we're all so close and similar in personality. It causes us to butt heads, but we also, most of the time, can be adult enough to come to a good solution.
exactly. So getting to your first mobile unit, well, coming into EOD, when you came straight into EOD, how much did you know about the program? And then after you went through the 31 portion, you got to your first mobile unit. Was it what you expected, or where was that line?
Yeah. So how I found out about it, once, like in my mind, I told my mom I wanted to join the army and go be a ranger, live my life of danger or whatever, for about a week, and then she said, "You're not joining the army. You're joining the Navy." And so her brother, my uncle Pete, he was a Vietnam. He's a riverboat dude back in Vietnam. So she called him, and he talked to me about it, and he was telling me about, they used to take these dudes up the river, and they would get in the water and go chase after stuff and blow stuff up, and then they take them back down to to Nang or wherever they were based out of. And so he's the one that kind of told me about EOD. And so when I talked to the recruiter, and he if you take your ASVAB or whatever, and he's like, okay, well, you're gonna have to be a nuke because the Navy needs nukes. So you have to take this other test, this NFQT or whatever it was. It's like the nuclear version of the ASVAB. And so I literally circled or filled in like the C block, the old adage of when in doubt, Charlie out. And so I ended up scoring like a 40 on the nuke ASVAB thing. So that was out. And then was able to do what I wanted to do, which was sign up for EOD. So yeah, that's how I found out about it, man. When my uncle Pete told me about it from back in his day in Vietnam.
That's pretty awesome. Getting to the mobile unit, was it Was it what you kind of expected when you first got there?
So it was a double-edged sword. So yes, it was because everybody was running around with, most guys needed a haircut, and back in the day we wore like the UDT brown shorts with our jungle boots and a cami top, the old they used to call it the modified uniform. So that part was like, yeah, this is what I thought it was going to be. But then they at that time at Mobile Unit 1 out in Hawaii, they were another mobile unit to be part of the marine mammals program, and so they needed
Mm,
buildings built and all that stuff done. So me and like 10 other EOD assistants for the first, I don't know, man, maybe 6 months we were there. We didn't do anything. We were like CBs, but unskilled. We were unskilled labor. And so we did
gotcha.
construction work for about 6 months until the facility was built, and then and like literally built it from the ground up. Using a compactor, little portable gas powered compactor to smash the dirt down to build the footings for the cement, and then the buildings were those old Butler buildings. They come in a box with a book and you figure it out. So we built all this stuff, and then thank goodness I got paroled, man. The Gulf War, the first one was getting ready to start, and the gunner of the team, Mike Shepard at the time, he was like, well, "Give me that kid, we'll take him," and like literally probably picked me out of a hat. And so I got moved out of
Yeah.
the forced labor camp that was the Marine Mammals Detachment, and I moved over to Det 35. And that's where I stayed for for the next year and a half or whatever. So once I got over there, then it was more like the EOD I had envisioned.
Yeah. Getting getting over and like having the Gulf War starting. What was the I don't know, like atmosphere like?
Um, it was for me. I
Okay.
was nervous, man. The team that I was on at the time, they were. Imagine what we evolved into, 25, 30 years later. And at that time, they were like, hey, we're going to break you up into two-man teams, and you're going to be assigned to, either NSW or SF guys going into, to clear out Kuwait and all that stuff on the land. And, obviously, I've been doing nothing but, construction work for 6 months. So my train up and learning curve were pretty steep. And, honestly, I was nervous about it, man, because everyone else on the team, they were all very experienced guys. There was no basic techs on that team, and then there was me. So but
Wow.
we were put on like the whatever 96-hour prepare to deploy thing, and that went on for, I don't know, maybe 3 months. And then it got to the point where it looked like it was basically going to be only the MCM, the mine countermeasures guys going in to clear out the mine danger areas and stuff. And so we basically got stood down from that, and just kept doing regular, old school. Even got to go out to Johnson Atoll. Uh, they had brought at that time. Johnson
Nice.
Atoll was like a chemical demilitarization, a demilling plant where they would take all the old chemical weapons out of both Korea and out of Europe and take them on a ship out there. And they had this massive factory out there, and that wasn't what we were out there for, but we did make a trip out there, and it was cool to kind of see that. Not too many folks, especially at that time in the Navy, had been gone through tech escort training and had an opportunity to go out to Johnson Island.
Yeah.
Like it was pretty cool.
Who was running the demilling out there of those rounds? Was it Navy guys or was it another service?
Yeah, it was the Army. The colonel that was in charge of the command out there. It was mostly Army Chemical Corps, and then they had just a ton of contractors and GS civilians and stuff. The Air Force was out there that ran the airfield. Um, there wasn't much. I don't remember there being much of a Navy presence out there at all. Um, I just remember a lot of civilians and a lot of Army people. And we only spent
Yeah.
like, I'd have to look back in the, the I Love Me book or whatever, but I think we were only out there for like, maybe 2 weeks max. I might have that off by a day or two on either side. Because we had gotten called out. The, the yeah, well, the Coast Guard dudes, the Coast Guard divers on the buoy tenders, they sail around the world chasing out, swapping out batteries on the channel markers and stuff. And they had found what they believed to be some ordnance while they were out swimming around, kind of hobby lobbing after they finished swapping out batteries. So they had taken a couple pictures and they let the commander of the place know. So he sent the request, and it trickled down to the mobile unit. And so we loaded up over at Hickam Air Force Base there in Hawaii, and then and we flew out there, and we brought our bang and dive gear and all that sort of stuff, and we spent better part of a week. Just these things been there so long, they had grown into the coral, and we were actually using crowbars and
Oh
stuff
wow.
breaking them out of the coral, and then we ended up, if you can imagine, like a wood pile, like a cord of wood stacked up with all these. I think they were 90 mil uh, rounds, and we just had the C4 kind of laced all in between it. And then we detonated them, but it took us. I think it was a good solid week, man, because they were like at 60 feet, so you're only getting an hour, per guy down there
Yeah.
working, and there was only 6 of us, so it was, long days, and I'd say we were pretty much tapped out on repet time by the time that week was over. But it was fun, and again, kind of old school EOD, getting to do that underwater demo stuff was cool, man.
Yeah, that's pretty legit. Like, especially getting down there with a crowbar. That's surprised back then they didn't just let you blow up the reef too.
Yeah, fused basically
Um,
in their shipping configuration. You could kind of see them where they would be 3 of them kind of like stacked to where the wooden crates they were in had just disintegrated over the years, and where there was just little stacks of 3 of them all over the place. So once we figured out, basically unfused, unfired, it just needed to be gone. And we talked with the commander out there, local neutralization factory, to look out for the environment, which was kind of comical. But um, he asked us to do as little damage as possible to the reef. So we did our best, man. We found an area that was not too far from where the bulk of the rounds were, but it was in an open, probably like a 100-foot by 100-foot kind of square that didn't have any reef in it, and that's where we made the wood pile, so to speak. I mean, obviously we still damaged some coral, but we did our best to kind of mitigate that.
no, that's awesome. That'd be pretty sweet to do. Especially like finding a bunch of stuff down there and having to go after it. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was fun, man.
After after you did after you did that round, did you end up going over to the Gulf at all,
I,
or
we did not.
because they stood you down,
Yep.
didn't make it over there? Okay.
Yeah. No, we did. Literally, we spent the next year um, doing range clearances and stuff. Because they had uh, an impact range on one of the smallest of the Hawaiian islands on Kaho'olawe. Was an active range for like 50 years, and they shut it down uh, right around that time, around the Gulf War timeframe. And so we'd go out there for 10 days a month, um, and just walking the impact areas and marking stuff and clearing out, old frag and scrap, and then blowing up any of the unexploded stuff that we found. So that was like damn near every month. It seemed like we were out there for 10 days. Um, and then what else did we do? There was
Wow.
an island off of Molokai that they used to bomb as well. So we jumped on one of the salvage ships, and they anchored the salvage ship over by there. And we'd just go out all morning, just scouting for UXOs. There was tons of them out there, and then we'd build up the charges after lunch, and then get our demo window for the afternoon, and we go blast all afternoon. Back, eat dinner, go to bed, wash, rinse, repeat, man. And then we did that for a couple weeks. And again, it was all underwater stuff, because the island's literally, it wasn't even an island, it's just a rock. And then everything around it out to about the 60 foot. Um,
Yeah.
depth, 60, 80, somewhere around there. Cleared, I don't even know how many things we popped out there, but again, that was old school EOD, right? Like uh, it wasn't like it was before I retired. It was the the war was going. The Gulf War had happened, and there were guys that were over there, but again, most of them were the mine countermeasures dudes. And that wasn't us. So
It couple things that seem interesting. I didn't even realize that Navy EOD was potentially on the hook for um the SF support and all that back then. That's kind of that's pretty cool to hear that, like, even back then they knew where to go.
yeah, for sure. And it wasn't, and this is all pre, what I guess I don't even know what they call it now, but I know when I retired, I think it was called like the CRIF or whatever. But before that, it was called the SIF, the Commanders in Extremis Force. All of that didn't start with Navy EOD supporting the Green Berets, both the Charlie Company of the Charlie 11 and Charlie 110. Those were the original SIF support, but that wasn't until like '96. So, and this is obviously back in early '91, and I had forgotten about that, honestly. I was in my damn I Love Me binder trying to find something else. I needed something for the VA, and I saw like the letter of appreciation or whatever it was from that time frame, and I was reading through it, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that's what we were on the hook for. Like, I just, you know how it goes, man. Time flies by, and you just don't remember stuff like you used
Yeah.
to. And I just happened to read it, and so, like, had I not read that, a month ago or whatever it was, I probably wouldn't have even remembered that to answer your question.
No, that's awesome. Um, something that I'm curious about. Have you been in the last like 10 or so years back to Hawaii at all? And how different? Like, I'm imagining just with everything nowadays, everything's building up and there's more people and things and buildings and all that everywhere. I can imagine Hawaii being amazing back then. And if have you been back to see kind of the difference of when you were there working versus now?
Absolutely. Two times, one for work and then one for vacation. So when I was up at Indian Head, myself and the command master chief that was at detective, good friend of mine named Bob Zimmerman. Bob and I had to travel out. We were going out to Mobile at 5 for some stuff, but we also had to stop off in Hawaii to do some briefings at the NECC Pacific or NECPAC. The chief of staff out there at the time was Captain Marty Beck, and Bob and I had both served with Marty previously, and there were some briefings we had to do from detective in person out there to him and his staff. And so we were in Hawaii for about 3 days, and and this DC and came here to Millington. That was in 2016. So this was probably like, I'm gonna say 2015. I'm gonna kind of split the difference, man. And so Bob and I went out to the shore deck out there, and we sat with those guys for a couple hours, and it was I actually threw those guys in the truck, and because they had seen where like the old Moby Unit 1 building used to be, and some of the other stuff, but some of those buildings had been torn down, so there was nothing but like a concrete pad. And so I threw those guys in the truck and took them on a tour and kind of did like a virtual tour of, hey, this is what the footprint looked like, back when I got here when I was 19 years old or whatever. And it was kind of cool for those young guys at the short end to get someone who had been out there back in the day to tell them about all this stuff. And like, even those old buildings I was talking about earlier that we built for the marine mammals, like those two buildings are actually still there, or three or whatever it was. It's like an MWR kayak rental place or something now, but it it was cool to talk with those guys. And then to your question about the buildup, you know, when I was there as a young guy, the whole little base there at Westlock, where the short end still is, it was surrounded by basically sugarcane fields. there was no houses and townhouses, and now that
Really?
whole area is nothing but townhouses and houses and stuff, and that, so like I said, that was in 2015 ish, and then me and the family went back out there on vacation. This was Christmas time of 2021. Yeah, Christmas time 2021. And then obviously that time we spent about half the time down in Waikiki, and then the second half at the MWR beach cottages that are over at by the Coast Guard station at Barbers Point, which when I was there, Barbers Point was still a naval air station. So to drive through what used to be the naval air station and see
Oh,
nothing but
really?
houses and civilians, like the Coast Guard base is still there, and then the little mini mart, the little NEX mini mart is actually still operational over there, and but the rest of it's all civilian stuff. So but it was pretty cool to see the.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear. Like I sometimes I just think about as I'm like driving through places that are super built up. Just think about how different it was, even 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and where it is now. That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
After
yeah, for sure.
after Hawaii, what'd you get into?
So let's see. Finished up on that team, got put on another team, and we did like a old school shipboard deployment Westpac. Closed out the base in the Philippines. That was in, sure I got my years straight. 92.
Nice.
Yeah, it was like October 1st, 92 is when the lease for Subic Bay ran out. So we were there with one of the big deck amphibs. We all the Marines and all the rest of the U.S. stuff that was there, and we were there about a month, and then loaded all that up and took it all to Okinawa. And then the ship was doing a home port shift from San Diego to Sasebo, Japan. So that was how the Moby Unit 1 team that I was on, we basically flew to San Diego, got all the gear, loaded onto the ship, actually stopped back in Hawaii on the way, um, and then went over to the Philippines to shut that place down. And then, like I said, it was just basically an old school Westpac. And then once that was done, got back to Hawaii. I was only there for a month or two before I got my orders to go back to Indian Head to finish, go back through the second phase of EOD school, which, supposed to take about 6 months, but, I decided to get the full learning experience there. And it took me about a year. And then after that, I went out to Moby Unit 5. So,
Yeah, a lot of people say like, give people credit for making it through just without any hiccups. But I feel like, cause I took a little extra time when I went through EOD school as well, obviously by choice, just like you. And, and I feel like, I did it because I just really wanted to know more by the time I got to the I wanted to be full up round, as they say. Right. So I, yeah.
I wish I could lie to your face and tell you that was my plan. It was simply a case of me running my mouth more than I should have. And back in the day, I think their rules about targeting students academically were probably not as strict as they are now. And so my mouth got me into some hot water, and I ended up taking a 4 month time out from training, and plus I was a junior dude. I was like a junior E5, and back then, we had all these fleet dudes that were like senior E6s and stuff, so they would get back in class before me. So I just had to wait till there was finally a spot, and yeah, and it's funny stuff. Again, Jamie Hurdell and I were laughing about it, because there was when we were there, when I was out of class, I was working out at Area 8, and it was winter time, so like the instructors didn't want to go outside, so I was going out setting up all the problems before the test day. So I had reasonably good, valuable intelligence of what the test problems looked like that day. And there was I think statute of limitations is probably up on this one, so we could talk about it. But there was an incident where one of the guys, I'll leave his name out of it, because I'm not 100% sure that he's officially retired yet. But he got down to his problem, and it was one of the ones that, like, they didn't have one in the training area. You would have never seen this thing ever, and they, like, pulled the tarp off of it, and he
Mm.
spent, like, 5 minutes reconning it and then double time back to start his, pubs research and all that crap. And so it didn't take them long to realize that there was perhaps some information circulating that wasn't supposed to be. And so they called an all stop and, like, literally had JAG come down from up in DC, and it, it all turned,
Oh, dude.
everybody just didn't say anything, kind of, I don't want to say pleaded the fifth, but the junior sailor version of pleading the fifth, and they basically couldn't pin it on anybody. Um, and So when those guys graduated, and I don't know if the guys still do this now, but, like, you used to, like, as a class, uh, they'd get like an old piece of ordnance that was in the training area, and you'd spend a couple days, like, kind of sanding it down and painting it and putting all your class names on it or whatever. And that one, I have a picture of it somewhere here in the house, like an actual photo. But it was like an old like Mark 6 mine or something. But on the front of it, there was a big picture of a Jaguar, and then that class, it said the Jag Men of EOD, because they all got hemmed up by the Jag, and it was actually a pretty serious thing. But again, band of brothers, man, just stick together and grinded it out. And so that, yeah, their thing, it was the Jag Men of VOD, and then they all went on to underwater. And I don't know if I ended up joining that class for underwater, or it was the class after that. I can't remember, but anyway, not long after the whole Jag Men of VOD incident, I finally got back into training and graduated.
That's legit. You were really towing that line. It
Yeah,
sounds
there'll be
like.
some old dude that hears this listening. He'll be start laughing because he will remember that he was 100% a part of that alleged incident.
When you got to Mulbean at 5, going from Hawaii to Mulbean at 5, how was that transition?
Yeah, it was good. The best part about it was literally right before, or right after I got to Mobile Unit 5, they were decommissioning Mobile Unit 1 in Hawaii. So, like, half the dudes that were in Hawaii that I knew then got orders out to Mobile Unit 5. So when I checked in there, it was like there was like probably 25% of the command that I didn't already know. So it was a pretty easy transition, man.
What were kind of the mission sets out of Mulbean at 5? Was it back then still heavy Paycom centric?
For sure, 100% Paycom back then. We had a couple teams. Well, I think we only had one MCM team when we first got there. It was like one MCM team. There were three mobile detachments or mobility platoons, or I don't even know what we call them now. Just regular straight stick EOD team. And so I think there was literally one MCM team, and there were three mobile teams. And there was, at that time, I'm trying to think, I don't think the carrier was in Yokosuka yet. I don't really remember, but I know that there were some guys that did like a shipboard deployment out of there too, because some of the ammo ships back in the day, when we used to put 4 or 5 guys on the ammo supply ships, that was one of the things. That wasn't what my team did. We basically traveled around Paycom, man, doing either UXO work or exercises and stuff like that. And then that was also the time when what do we call it now? I think it's like the Defense Department's MIA and POW recovery activity, or whatever
Yeah.
it's called now. Back then, it was a joint task force. So it was the Joint Task Force for Full Accounting, and they were heavy in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, And so it had mainly been Army and Marine Corps supporting them from an EOD perspective, because they hadn't really done anything out in the ocean yet. And they got a call, like a fisherman had recovered a wheel off of a B-52, and they were able to match the serial number. So they had a rough
Mm.
idea. And there were two B-52s that had like a midair collision back in, during the Vietnam War, and they crashed, and some of the remains were recovered, but some of them weren't. And so they wanted to see if they could find, the fuselage and or, anything of that they could help positively identify that those aircraft, were confirmed, crashed. And so
Yeah.
we flew out there, flew into uh, Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City, um, and then trucked all our stuff down to a little town called Vung Tau in South Vietnam. It's like a beach town, be kind of like, the Panama City of Saigon, so to speak. And, and
Yeah.
loaded up on this old, like, Vietnamese. I can't call it a salvage ship, man, but it was like somewhere between an ocean going tug and like I guess I'll just say a salvage ship, but that's not they have very little salvage capability. And then we'd pull out, and we had the
Yeah.
back in the day used to have at the reserve mobile units, there was a side scan sonar, like, detachment. So those guys came with us, and so we ran side scan sonar off the back of the ship for, man, it was weeks. Um, and finally, after like 3 weeks, we finally got a good hit, a good couple hits. And when we got down in the water, me and one of the boys were on the first one down, and I could see it. It's only in maybe 60, 70 feet of water. But once you got about 20, 30 feet off the bottom, I could see it. The first thing we found, it was actually the like the B-52. So that was the first chunk. And then once we knew we were in
Really.
the general area, we dove for another week or two, and we were able to finally, we found like the main fuselage thing that, had basically been turned inside out when it hit the water. But we were able to fish out
Wow.
some components, some of the, like, the radio equipment and stuff like that that had serial numbers on it. And we were able to bring and recover that stuff. And again, this is kind of way back in the day, pre SATCOM and stuff, so we passed that information, um, and then via radio. And then when we got back into port, the officer from the Joint Task Force, who's a Marine warrant officer, he made a phone call back to Hawaii and passed all the serial number stuff, and they were able to match up the serial numbers to the aircraft. And so that was, that was good, because they finally pinpointed the location. We didn't have any, there were no remains or anything left at that point, but we, just components and trash on the bottom, fuselage junk on the bottom. But that sort of stuff is what we were into back then, because we didn't have, two or three ground wars going on at the same time. And so it was not uncommon, for those sorts of jobs to come up.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, being able to do something that with all our mobility capabilities, um, being able to go out and actually find something like that and get some I don't know, closure, I guess, basically for DoD and everything. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was such an lucked out. A couple months after that trip, they did the first request to have Navy EOD support one of the teams going ashore and conducting ops in Laos, recovery operations in Laos. And when they called out to the mobile unit, because I had spent all that time doing range clearance at mobile unit 1, uh, they chose me even as a slick bomb, you know, based on the fact that I was a prior EOD assistant and that I had, pretty good experience base for UXO type stuff. So I got to go to Laos, by myself. I was a, independent deployer. Met up with the team in Hawaii and then flew to Thailand and then flew into Laos. And we spent like a month out in Laos, searching another site where think it was a C-47, like the old double prop, kind of troop transport plane that had gotten
Okay.
shot down. And
Yeah.
excuse me, the reports were that the locals there had buried the crew, so we were searching the area where they thought they had buried the crew. But it was cool because there was ordnance out there too. Fun. In fact, I had the so the first day we go out to the site, we fly in this helo, and it's the army captain who is the team leader, the translator, the medic, and me. And the local dude, we land in this field, and I look over, and all the villages, all the huts are built on dispenser half shells, to keep them off the ground. And I'm like, holy crap, man, where did they get all those from? Like, I mean, there was just hundreds of clamshells, uh, holding all these little straw huts up, these little bamboo shacks. And so anyway, this old time of the village elders walking us out to the site, and he's trying to say bomb, or I can hear him, he's saying bomba or something like that. And the translator's like, hey, so, so we go walking over to it, and I got a picture of that somewhere here too at the house, I'm sure. Um, and the first thing I see is that big ass golden DST tail fuse thing on this Mark 82. And I'm like, man, I'm pretty sure they told us at EOD school that thing is dangerous, you know? And I'm like, holy shit, man. And then you realize, they've been walking past this thing for 20 years. And then but it was just kind of cool. Like, who gets to walk up on a, DST with a battery dead and take a picture of it, and I just, again, luck of the draw, man.
Yeah.
But that was day one out there on that site. So, and it got a little more interesting from there as the days went by.
I can only imagine. When I was out in Guam, we sent some people out to go help do like mine clearance stuff in Laos, and just it is crazy how much stuff there was, in what 2009, 10, 11. Still like, and still all kinds of stuff. It's that would be interesting. Those walk up onto that.
Like you said, I mean, the place is just littered with ordnance, and unfortunately, it probably will be forever. Like, but yeah, that was cool. And, the only crappy thing about that trip, I think, when I got back to Guam, I'd been back for, I don't know, a month or so, and I remember the doc coming down. We were going out diving, and he's like, "Hey, man, you feel okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, man, I feel fine." And he's like, "Man, your blood work came back from your physical a little jacked up, but you sure you're okay?" I'm like, "I'm good, man," and didn't think anything of it. Then fast forward like another month, we're in Hawaii, back when the training unit was still in Hawaii as well. The mobile unit was closed down, but the training unit was still open. So we were in Hawaii at the training unit doing training, and I started feeling like not good. And eventually they had to take me to the hospital, and they didn't know what was wrong with me. And they start testing stuff, and it turned out I had malaria from when I'd been in Laos, 3 months before that. So I got to spend like 10 days in freaking Tripler waiting for the malaria to clear up a little bit.
Dude, that's crazy. It's no bueno.
No bueno, bro.
How long were you out in Guam for?
So I got there, like, let me see, man, like somewhere in the summer. I'm gonna say June of '90. After all the Vietnam and Laos stuff, I got put on that other team. I was in team training. We went and did, since you were out in Guam, you remember the combined afloat readiness and training, the carrot exercise they used to do like every other year or whatever. Um, we got to do the first
Yep.
one, and we literally hitched a ride on a frigate coming through Guam that took us over to Brunei or somewhere over there. And then we linked up with I think it was the USS Germantown, like one of the amphibs. So we spent like 4 or 5 months cruising around doing exercises, Malaysia and Singapore and Thailand and PI. And then got back from that in the summer of '96. Yeah, that was So like you'll appreciate this. Like in the time when I was detailer and like the money situation got crazy and dudes were getting extended everywhere involuntarily. Well, same stuff happened in '96 when like government was
Yeah.
shutting down and all this. So they involuntarily extended all of us until the
Mhm.
next fiscal year. So I had like, I don't know, an extra 3 or 4 months in Guam just hanging out waiting for the budget to get sorted out. And then November, so around Thanksgiving, I think, when I transferred from there to Mobile Unit 3 in San Diego.
Gotcha. So what you're saying is it wasn't just you forcing people to stay because you wanted them to.
Yeah, no, it's the same stuff happened to us, dude.
When you went back stateside, how different was it, the community aspect? Because one of the things I noticed is when I was out in Guam, I did 5.5 years in Guam, and then I came stateside, and it was very different. Like I didn't realize it, and honestly, I did not appreciate it at the time how close everybody was in Guam versus stateside, where you have so many more options, and like you can go visit your family, and you can actually have friends outside of just the military. How was it for you going from Guam back to stateside?
I would say it was the same on, basically two Oconus mobile units with that small unit overseas kind of mentality that you were talking about. And then getting to San Diego where you could have a dude on one guy on the team that lives in freaking Temecula. So he's driving an hour north. And then you got another dude that lives, you know, 30 minutes south of San Diego. And they're on the same team. So like they're never hanging out on the weekends, man. They live 100 miles apart, and that was very
Yeah, yeah,
weird for me to see that. And then, of course, as guys at the Oconus units sometimes face a little challenges coming back, trying to integrate into the CONUS mobile unit mentality. And so we had a few missteps trying to reintegrate back into the normal EOD community, especially as young single dudes. Um, But I was lucky, man. I had a couple cousins of mine that were basically the same age as I am that all actually lived in San Diego. So we were able to kind of
nice.
get brought right into their circle, and so it was kind of a good um, melding of some young Navy EOD guys and a civilian populist beach crowd from Pacific Beach, and it worked out pretty well. I mean, some of those folks that I met through my cousins, I'm still friends with now. Like me and the family were up at one of the family's camping properties up in Montana like 2 years ago, man. So like, and they were just here visiting probably 2 months ago. So even those non EOD relationships uh, were still fostered just as if we like they were part of the community. I mean, if Walt was sitting here with me right now, you just assume he's some retired Navy EOD guy that you never met before, with a beard and a broken sense of humor and a Tito's and tonic. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've actually been surprised how many people, even on this podcast specifically, have some ties to Montana. I My mom was from Montana, from the Kalispell Whitefish area, and man, if my wife wasn't from Houston and like just does not like the cold, that's where I'd end up. But my wife is against that.
Yeah, dude, that area you're talking about, that's right up where their property is. It's a little bit west of there, I think. But the little town, it's called Knoxon, and population like 7 people, and but it's right up in that part of Montana you're talking about, man. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I love it. That's whenever I go there, uh, man, life just gets a little clearer and a little easier.
That is a fact, my friend.
So you got to San Diego, and what kind of jobs you end up doing out of San Diego?
So I spent the first 18 months, uh, give or take, doing marine mammals. I actually requested to do that because I didn't. get a chance to do it when I was in Hawaii, and then honestly, I thought I'd try some other part of the community. I'd already done a ton of like regular straight stick vanilla EOD work, and had traveled around all over the Pacific, everywhere from South Korea down to Brunei at that point, and so I did mammals for about 18 months, and it was super fun, man. I mean, it was a great job. I worked the harbor defense, the Mark Six system, so it was the working hours were very conducive to a single dude. We'd work from like 1400 until like 2200, and so it was good. You'd sleep in and then go out and burn it down all night, and didn't have to be to work until after lunch. So that was a rough 18 months. uh, Not really. It was great. It was a lot of fun, man. And you know, again, as a single guy, having a dolphin that you train in Southern California is not a terrible way to start a conversation when you're out after hours.
Yeah, and actually being able to be telling the truth when you say it, because I know I've said it, but I wasn't telling the truth.
Right. Yeah. Well, Lord knows I probably spent my fair bit of time on that side of the truth line as well. But yeah, it was like I said, it was good. It was a good gig, man. I wouldn't have traded it for anything.
How many broken ribs do you have from that? Because I've heard some interesting stories about when those things get protective.
Yeah, I was very lucky. I got hit one time with the tail. We were taking the animal out of the pen, and when they're not cooperating, you pull their little nets up to where they're stranded on the net, and then a couple guys would have to jump in and grab this 400-pound beast, and try to muscle it up the boat. And once we got the first half of her in there, she kicked her tail like she's supposed to get up into the boat, but my back and kidneys and spine were like in between her tail and the boat, and she hit me
Oh,
so hard. You've been punched in the kidneys, man. It's just like it make you stop and fall down, and so and you got life jackets on and stuff. So I just rolled over in the water, and I'm like, I can't feel my legs, and they're like, quit goofing around, dude. It's in the boat. We got work to do, And I'm like, no, seriously, like, go get the backboard. I can't feel my legs. And so my my best bro and roommate at the time, he's big. He was a big dude, man, and he reached down and just grabbed me, pulled me up, and laid me on the dock there. And then by the time they got the backboard down, they started strapping me in. I was able to start moving my toes around a little bit. It shocked the nerves, like a stinger. And I was okay, other than some
yeah.
bruised ribs, not broken. So I call that a win. But yeah, those animals, they're strong, and more than one guy learned the hard way how strong they are.
When I was PSIing at Mobile Unit 3, the only experience I have with them, which was not much, is I was told to go wash um, the docks with the cages, and I didn't know that there was a dolphin in there. And so I'm like washing it, and you know how you get that feeling that somebody's just watching you? And I kind of turn around,
Yep.
and this dolphin was just like doing its little kick thing, just staring at me. And the creepier thing is, as soon as I turned around and looked at it, it just stared. It felt like it stared straight into my eyes and then slowly dropped itself below the water. And I was like, all right, I'm done. Like, this thing's going to get me.
Yeah.
I'm out.
Yeah, that's it's definitely an eerie feeling, especially if you didn't know it was there, man. I tell you, we had we were getting done with work, and my dolphin at the time, Miss Loma, she was not cooperating that day, and she wouldn't get in the boat. And so I'm like, all right, you're staying out tonight, because they don't sleep well when they're not in their little cage. The flip side of that was I had to stay at work too, so it was like a 24-hour shift. But so anyway, so while she's out, she's hanging out right by the piers. Well, right, this is where Mobile 3 is now. If like you came out of the quarterdeck and like made a left to get on that main road that runs along the water, and you go all the way down to where they have like those landing craft and stuff on that other corner of Coronado. of NAB rather. That's where the mobile
Yeah.
unit used to be, is over there. And
Okay.
they anyway, the SEALs were the Bud students were doing Hell Week, and they used to put the little uh, IBS or whatever they call the little small boats that they roll around in. They used to put them
Hmm.
in right there, right across from the dolphin pens. And so those guys are down, come down there, 2 in the morning or whatever it was. You can see this cavalcade of chem lights coming down the road. And so I go over, talk of our animals is out right now. And she's not happy. And those guys getting in the water, they may get bumped or, knocked around a bit. I just wanted them to know that. And the instructor looks at me, man. And sure enough, man, they're getting into water. And I can see her. She's watching the whole thing. I see her duck her head down, getting the sonar going, and all of a sudden she's gone. And I'm like, holy crap, here we go. And of course, she goes and hammers one of those dudes. And they're like, of course, they immediately think it's a shark, which, I would too. And they're like, you never seen
Yeah.
dudes get in a boat so fast because they think there's literally a shark circling them right now. And then, I felt terrible for them, because there's nothing I could do. And the instructors were just like, don't care.
Yeah.
They need to, a little tough love. And so that went on for, she just kept circling their boats until they eventually, when they paddled around into the bay over there, Glorietta Bay or whatever it was, she finally came back. But I think she was tracking them for probably a good hour. And then she came back and just hung out. But yeah, it was pretty funny to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd definitely be freaking out at nighttime. Something's bumping me. Got a fin popping out of the water. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd be freaking out.
Yeah. That would be awful. Like, there's probably some poor kids that were going to be, the best SEALs on the planet one day and quit that night because they got bumped by a dolphin that they thought was a shark. You know what I mean? Like, and you can't blame them.
Yeah, absolutely. After you got done with
Yeah.
with the mammals, what'd you get into?
So let's see. I hadn't done MCM yet, so I got picked up for MCM team, and then did like that whole workup thing, and then we ended up doing a deployment on. Back in the day, they had like an old amphib helo carrier thing that they turned into the mine countermeasures command ship, and the mighty warship Inchon was at that time based out of Ingleside, Texas, with all the other minesweepers and stuff. So we loaded up all our stuff and trucked it over there, and loaded up on the Inchon with one of the teams that was also it was a Mobile Unit 6 detachment Ingleside. So they put an MCM team on there. Then there was another team and the command, like the battalion staff from Mobile Unit 6 in Charleston, loaded up, and a MCM team from Mobile Unit 2. So it was 4 MCM teams on the ship, plus like
Wow.
the recompression chamber guys and the Mobile Unit 6 command staff. And the whole plan was to transit through across the Atlantic, through the Med, and get over into the Gulf for like MCM exercises with, Oman and Qatar, all those places over in the Gulf. And I remember we got to Port Said in Egypt, and we were waiting overnight to go through the channel, the Suez, the next day. And I got up, and all the helos were gone. So like they opened up the flight deck for an hour or so you could do some running up on the flight deck. And I remember I was sitting on the fantail there on the flight deck looking, and I'm staring at the sun, and I'm like, why am I'm looking east? Like, that's not right. We're supposed to be going the other direction. And I finished up, went downstairs, and then the captain came over, the old 1MC there. And I guess that night before was when NATO started the air campaign for Kosovo. So they were diverting us up off the coast of Albania because we had all those heavy lift MCM helicopters for to provide humanitarian aid and all that stuff. So we ended up there flying ashore into Albania and then up along the border uh, for man, it seemed like it was like 3 months, but I'm probably exaggerating that. I don't somewhere around there, We were doing that for a few months. And then once that was done, they got one of the Marine ARGs had pulled in there to continue that support. And then we headed back to Texas, and then back to the mobile unit, and it's funny because while we were on the ship, the detailer was in San Diego, and they were doing extensions and orders and all that stuff. And they were like, "Hey, what do you want to do?" I'm like, "Hey, man, I'll extend for a year so I can go on deployment." Because there was another team, a good buddy of mine, Pat, was on, and I was gonna go to that team, kind of get my my LPO ride, and then go on deployment. And I got back, and I was like, "Cool, man. When do I switch my gear over to the other team?" And they're like, "Yeah, you're not. You're gonna go up to ops and be the operations leading petty officer." And I was like, "Man, I signed an extra year to go on deployment." And they're like, "Yeah, tough shit. You're going ops." Um, and again, when you're young, you don't realize the work behind the scenes that your chiefs and your senior chiefs and master chiefs are doing to set you up for success. And I didn't. I was a spoiled, smart ass first class master tech that didn't understand the big picture at all, and so
Yeah.
I ended up spending my last year, my fourth year there at 3, up in ops. But it was a great opportunity for me. I learned a ton, um, and ultimately, you know, unbeknownst to me, they completely set me up literally for success for the rest of my career. And that was that, man.
That's great. That is something that's man, there's so many times where I can think back to E5 me and even E6 me, and I'm just like, man, this is all stupid. These decisions are retarded. They don't understand. And then I hate to admit it, like the part of me that like wants to pretend I'm not old hates to admit it, but now I'm like, man, I understand a lot more. I don't always agree with everything, but at least understand a lot more.
Sure. Yeah, no, it was definitely and again, unfortunately, because I was such a spoiled, arrogant, freaking young dude, and I couldn't appreciate it at the time. It wasn't until later in life that I was able to thank all of those dudes, um, for what they had done. Because like I said, they literally set me up for what was the next whatever. Trying to think how many years I had in at that time. 11. So for a pretty good run, man.
So then I think the next mobile unit you were at was 8, right? You went over to 8.
Yeah, well, in between there, so I got the master chief I was working for when I was in ops. He's like, "Hey, man, what do you want to do next?" And I was like, "Well, I'd like to line up for the follow-on tour down at Australia at the Australian clearance diving team, guys out of Sydney." And so I was like, "Do I need to extend here and go over to VSW to kind of put that in my portfolio to be competitive for that?" And because at the time, I'm sure Henry, Ace Thrift. Uh, Ace had been
Yeah.
selected to go to Australia, as an E6, and then this was in like Christmas time of 2000. So like right when or Christmas of '99, like right when the big Millennium thing was going to happen. Anyhow, a
Oh yeah.
couple months after that, Ace got picked up for LDO, and that spot then was open, and the master chief had put my name in the hat to go. And I got lucky enough to be selected by the Group 1 Master Chief Mafia, to go down there. So that's where I went from San Diego down to Sydney for 2 years, and I was basically at their mobile unit, um, for 2 years down there. And I'm sure being out at 5 for as much time as you did, you certainly would have experienced some time with our brothers from down under.
Oh yeah. They're characters, shall we say. I can only imagine how much fun it would be to actually be down there and living with them. That That sounds like a great time.
Yeah, man. So living down there was insane, you know. And then 9/11 happened while I was down there. Um, and so, you know, the embassy wanted to consolidate the footprint. So there was an 1140 down there who we got a place together. You know, not suffering at all, man. Like straight up penthouse, you know, 100 meters off the beach, and you could hear the waves crashing. So life was good down there for them 2 years.
when 9/11 happened down there, did they start spinning up? Where they start? Um, did the Aussies? Were you aware of them like prepping a bunch too?
Yeah, 100%. They were putting a team together that was going to get on one of the Aussie ships to support some of the oil and gas platform operations and some of the interdiction stuff. And then I was it was about 50% of my guys, because at that time I was like the LPO of the MCM team, because I hadn't made part of that kind of VBSS maritime interdiction operation thing, and I couldn't go because at that time they didn't have all this because nobody knew, everything was kind of crazy, and I was leaving there. I was scheduled. No, that's not true. I wasn't leaving yet, but they didn't have like the basically the SecDef was like, no, the Australians aren't taking a U.S. dude deploying to the Persian Gulf. He stays there until we tell him to come home. And so I just did
Yeah.
local, just same stuff. It's just like being at the mobile unit. You know, we went out, we did range clearance stuff. You know, it's underwater demo stuff. You know, pop some old projectiles that were in Sydney Harbor that were found, and you know, just regular EOD stuff, man, and regular diving stuff. And so did that for the next probably about year and a bit. And then you know, in Christmas time '02, January '03, somewhere in that time frame is when I got my my orders to come back to the States. Um, and I basically hadn't been on shore duty yet, so they were like, "You have to go to shore duty, dude. You've been at sea for literally like 10 years or more." I think it was like 12 at that point. So I got sent to the schoolhouse, and I got to the schoolhouse in early '03. In fact, I was at like instructor training the day the Iraq invasion started. Um, so
Oh
that's
wow.
where I spent, you know, '03 to '06 um, at the schoolhouse down at Eglin.
How was the schoolhouse tour? I can imagine that it could be uh, a little different because it's obviously brand new guys. You're trying to run that, but how'd you like being an instructor?
It was, yeah, I loved it, man. To be honest, you know, I spent like the first, I don't know, I'm gonna say maybe 15 months, maybe 18 months in the ground division, and I was lucky enough just with timing that I was able to, you know, be the NCOIC of ground for that entire time for,
Nice.
you know, like I said, about 18 months, and then and you know, I was out instructing every day just like everybody else, you know, and I didn't spend a ton of time in my office, unless you had, you know, academic counseling stuff. But other than that, I was out teaching because I enjoyed it, you know, and you know, teaching guys the why, right, not the how. Right, the how is easy just through repetition,
Yeah.
but the why. Why are we shooting at this spot on this fuse? You know, explain to me the functioning, man, and why this is the way to do it. And I just enjoyed it, man. You know, I love looking in them in the eyes and seeing them light bulbs come on. You know, and so it was good, man. And then after about 18 months, they had the Navy student manager was transferring. And this is back when I think now it's a little different, but they used to have an actual chief EOD type in the student management office to, you know, deal with the kids that are getting booted out of school or, you know, getting kicked out of class and getting rolled back and all that stuff. And as a young, you know, the chief, maybe 2 years at that point, it was a phenomenal experience to um, to learn how to lead young folks. And so, as much as I hated that job because it was like every weekend I was going down to the Okaloosa County Sheriff and, picking another one of the knuckleheads up that got rolled up at AJ's or something. You know, as much as I hated that part of the job, it was it was awesome. And some of those guys that were literally students that went through when I was the student manager, like some of those guys I still talk to this day. You know, um, and some of the guys that you've had on your show, like I met them when I was the student manager at EOD school. You know, and so it was good. And then see, I did that for about a year, I think, and then I went down to the IED division for like I don't know about 6 months because they were doing some transitional stuff with because the surge was on and they were changing curriculum and
Right.
we kind of pulled some of our more senior instructors into there to try help manage that transition as best we could. And so I spent my last little bit there in IEDs, and then I got an opportunity. Well, I had already put in for orders to go to Moby at 8, and then I called detail and said, "Hey, man, can I go to DLI on my way?" And he's like, "Sure. What language do you want to do?" I'm like, "I don't care. I only want to go for like 6 7 months, and then I want to go to Moby at 8." And they were like, "All right." Well, they didn't have any Italian for enlisted guys, but they had Spanish. And I was like, "I'll do that." And so we moved out to Monterey, me and my wife, and it worked out. Like the dude that was the student manager at DLI for the Navy was the guy that I had been on deployment with, 10, 15 years before that. And so my wife took the D lab, and because we were going overseas, she was able to ride in the Italian class, Space A. So my wife ended up doing the entire DLI class for Italian while I was in Spanish, and the buildings were right across the street from each other. So we were like two little school kids going to school every day, and then we'd have lunch in the afternoons there together, and go home and study. So we spent that 7 months. I think it was 7 months in Monterey doing that, and then we transferred from there over to 8.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I've heard that school is pretty intense though. Like one of the most intense schools as far as it's just crazy fast paced, and if you're not with the class, you're behind.
That's true. I mean, and even to when I was the detailer, and I had my language plan for the community, right? Like not sanctioned by anybody except for me. And you spend enough time out in Guam, old CJ, and me and
Oh yeah.
CJ came up with a plan to target certain languages and tie them to certain billets or at least certain geographical locations. And so that's why that's why I did that when I was in the detailer spot, because I had the experience of going to DLI, understood that it could be a fairly challenging academic environment, but also understanding the value of it. And so that was why I wanted to make sure that stayed a part of the program for the community while I had the opportunity to be in the seat and get at least a vote for that to happen.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know I've been on both sides of the stick where, been with, guys who have spoken the language, and while we still had an interpreter, it's exponentially beneficial to have somebody that is part of, your group that speaks it. And actually we're about to go do an exercise, and I didn't even think about it, but we're about to go a place where our interpreter can't go. And so I got to ask a guy who's technically supposed to be over us to be because he speaks Spanish really well and just like a natural speaker.
Yep.
And so I got to ask him to come out with us because, I mean, yeah, somebody was like, "Oh, it's going to be kind of difficult doing that stuff out there when you guys don't speak it." And I was like, "Oh crap, I did not even think about it." My head was all in the
Yep.
EOD stuff, and then it's like, oh yeah, I still got to talk to him.
Right.
Like, oh man.
Yeah. It's hard to do any sort of combined training and or operations if you can't understand each other.
Yeah. Getting out to, well, actually, so when you got out to 8, it was still in Italy, right? And then were you out there when it switched, or were
Yeah,
you
it
already
was, yep.
back?
So sort of. So I was on deployment, um, and CMC, the command master chief, called me, said, "Hey, congratulations, you're going to Rota." And I said, "Yeah, I know. That was the whole point of me extending to take another team and do the transition to Rota, and I was going to get another deployment." And they said, "No, you're too senior now," because I had two deployments as a senior chief, right? So like, well, I made senior chief on the
Okay.
first deployment, and then second deployment I was a senior chief, and so they're like, "No, dude, there's other folks that don't have a deployment yet. Certainly not a combat ride, and you're too old. Like, we need younger guys to do this. So you're going to do your staff penance." So I got sent to, and they said, "You're going to go work for the Commodore." I had no, I'm like, "I'm not moving to Virginia, dude. That's not the way this works. And they said, "No, you're going to Rota to be at the CTF 68 uh, staff command." And I was like, "I don't even know what that is, but sure, sounds great." Um, and so we moved to Rota probably about maybe 6 months, dude, before the mobile unit came over, I think.
How was working for the Commodore in that when you were expecting after, I should say, you were expecting to go there and take another team?
Yeah, I was initially disappointed and at the same time completely overwhelmed, right? Like, I literally came home from deployment, packed our stuff, and then like a month later we were gone. We were at and like checked in day one to sit through, the commander's update brief or whatever they were calling it back then, with the admiral in Naples on the VTC, the teleconference thing. And I spent the entire hour just writing down acronyms that I didn't know what they were. Um, like, zero business being a staff officer. Like, I had no idea. And then I was like dual hatted as like the senior enlisted for the Commodore, which again, I was an eight, dude. I'd only been an eight for like 2 years at that point. And so the learning curve was pretty steep. And but as the Commodore and I got to know each other, he was like, uh, most folks, when you mention his name, there's only going to be one of two reactions. One is not positive, and the other is super positive. And it took me a little while to get to that point, but once he and I found the common ground, we actually became, pretty legit, you know, officer enlisted advisor team. And I still talk to him to this day. I mean, I was texting with him probably not even a week ago. And we stopped by his house a couple years ago camping. He lives in just north of Colorado Springs, and we were out that way. Actually, on our way up to Montana, but we diverted over to his place. We spent a few days with him and his wife there in Colorado, and like I said, still talk to him
Nice.
to this day, man. And it was a great experience. I learned a ton. It was a huge opportunity to be able to kind of expand my mental horizon above the very tactical level and start to at least understand what the word operational meant, um, and
Yeah.
to have that ability to sit in these environments with these 2, 3, sometimes 4-star admirals and watch decisions get made, real decisions. And it was pretty awesome, man. And I got to do some pretty cool stuff as well, like when we got the next Commodore, because I think I had a total of three, because I ended up getting extended out there too. But opportunities came up, and uh, because I was one of the few guys on the staff with the clearance that EOD guys have, I kind of became like the special projects guy. And by no means is that an official title. It's just me being very unique opportunities to support some other efforts. And ultimately that led to my follow-on tour, um, when they were trying to stand up the EOD presence at the Office of Naval Intelligence, uh, when they were looking for the dude to fill that spot. uh, it it was pretty cool. I got a call and they were like, "Hey man, this so and so this is what we're doing here. This is what we think you're going to be doing when you get here. What do you think about coming over here? And the detailer made it pretty obvious. He's like, look, dude, you're not staying overseas anymore, because by that time I'd been like a 7-year stretch, I think, overseas, or maybe 6.5, whatever it was. Yeah, it's probably 6.5. That's probably more accurate. But he's like, you going to San Diego, Virginia Beach, or DC? Those are your options. And so, my wife, she's a city girl, so she was like, DC it is. And so we had our little dude there, and then the extension worked out because we were able to wait until he was almost a year old before we moved from Spain back to the DC area. And then
Nice.
so that's how I ended up back in DC.
That's good. Being able to wait a little bit. It's hard enough flying with a 1-year-old, but I can only imagine how much fun that would be to travel from that far with a a really young one.
Yeah, I don't know how guys do it, man. I'll be honest with you. We were flat out, just with it, and he was almost 1, so he was manageable, But hats off to the families that can do it with smaller kids, because that was not that would have been even more challenging for me.
One of the things you had written down on the questionnaire was as like just something that sticks with you is GMC Graham Lindsley's memorial service. Want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, for sure, man. If you'd have asked me that 20 years ago, I probably would have told you to pound sand, because I wasn't real good with it for a while, and this will tie into some of the other stuff I had listed on the questionnaire. But yeah, so Graham and I were at Indian Head together. Graham and I went to Mobile Unit 5 together, and so we were roommates in the barracks. And by roommates, we shared kind of the common head between the 2 rooms. And then when we got the authorization to move out in town, Graham and I, we were neighbors. And so he would come over. He was a terrible cook, and he was a very austere individual. Like, he had tons of money, but he didn't allow himself many creature comforts. Didn't have a TV. He literally would eat on old pie plates that he got from Boston Market or whatever, and he would just rewash them every night. We literally bought him a set of dishes and silverware for Christmas one year because we're tired of him eating on pie plates. We're like, come on, dude. And then when I transferred to Mobile Unit 3, Graham transferred at the same time, so we rented a house together. So we were roommates again. And then when we were on that deployment where we ended up off of Albania, supporting ops for Kosovo, Graham was on that deployment with me as well. So we were pretty thick as thieves, man, for quite a while. We met in 93, 94, and then we were roommates and or neighbors up till let me get my math right here, man. Up until I think he moved out in that would have been in 2000. Yeah, in 2000 when he got engaged. And then I transferred to Australia, and he was going from San Diego, going to Mobile Unit 8 to Sigonella to over to Sicily. So anyway, man, so fast forward to 2002, February 2nd, 2002. I fly from Australia to San Diego. Graham's getting married, so I was going to be the best man for his wedding, fiance and not wife yet. She flew out, and because I don't think she had met Graham yet at that point. So anyway, she flew out to San Diego from let's see, where was she living at that time? She was in Tampa. And then so we went did the wedding and all that stuff. So this is February of 2002. Fast forward about 6 months. So now it's August of 2002. And literally in the span of a week, man, I went from being a single E6, with my best bro alive, to I picked up Chief, got the word. Tracy was actually out there visiting when I got the call from the embassy that I had gotten selected for Chief. And then I proposed to her. She flew back, and I didn't even get a chance to talk to Graham about the proposal thing because he was TAD when I proposed. And then like 2 days, maybe 3 days went by. I don't remember exactly. I'd have to go in my into one of the journals to find the exact date. But I get a call. I'm at work, and one of the guys, he's old retired master chief now. At the time, was he at Group 1 at the time? No, I think he was still at Mobian 3 at the time. Anyway, he had been the senior chief in charge of the team when we'd done that deployment to the Med. He called me and he said, "Hey man, Graham's dead." And I was like, "Shit," I just assumed, because this is like pre-Iraq, but Afghanistan, we already had guys in Afghanistan, so I just assumed he was a battlefield casualty. So I asked him. I said, "Hey man, I thought he was TAD doing an exercise up in Israel. What happened?" And he goes, "He killed himself, bro." And I was like, "Holy shit!" Right. So then I had like this crazy emotional death spiral thing going on. And so I'm in the middle of like Chiefs initiation, but I was in Australia, so there was like a couple other U.S. chiefs and senior chiefs that were on exchanges like I was, and then there were some Aussie clearance divers who had been assigned to the training units and had gone through initiation with the U.S. when they were assigned at the training unit. So there was like a half a dozen or so folks and a couple folks from the embassy that kind of were going to cobble together this initiation thing for me. And then we're like 5 days into it, and now my best friend's dead, so I'm like not real cooperative about this whole Chiefs process thing. And so now we're getting to, it took a little while for him to get released because he died on base there in Sicily, but it's technically an Italian base, so the Italians had the lead for the the cause of death and the autopsy and blah 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 blah. So it took a week or two for him to get released to fly the remains back to San Diego. And again, he'd only been married 6 months, right? And so finally, once we knew that was happening, I flew from Australia to San Diego, and then I was there at the airport when the guys from Mobian 8 brought the remains in. And the officer that escorted the remains was Chief Warrant Officer Rommel Meza, and Rommel was our OIC, Graham and mine's OIC of that same Mediterranean MCM deployment that we spoke of earlier. So now it's time for the memorial service, and of course I knew his wife and I knew his mom and his sister, like they were literally like family to me, And so we got to do the what do you call it, like the wake or the viewing thing before the big event at the chapel there in San Diego for like the actual memorial service. So like I said, Graham was a peculiar dude, right? And like one of his weirdo things that he did was he would go, if he was going to McDonald's, he would get like hamburgers, but like plain ass hamburgers with like ketchup and like a pickle or something, just some like bizarre. Couldn't have mustard, couldn't have onions, whatever his thing was. He was a super weird dude, and he was also like the guy in the room with the remote control that if a commercial came on, he would change the channel. And like this is before we had streaming services, right? So you actually had to suffer through commercials, and so it was so irritating after like living with this dude for like 8 years of this remote control thing. And so, and then he had to have ketchup on everything. Like I would spend, like I already told you, he was a terrible cook. So, but I wasn't, and so I would cook a meal for the house, and then we'd sit down and like, he'd squirt ketchup on this damn $30 steak that I just spent, all day marinating and, grilled to perfection, 129 degrees, spot on. Right. And so he would put ketchup on it. So, yeah. So anyway, man, back to the memorial service thing where we're at the viewing. And so his wife, Annie, she says, "Hey, all you and the boys can have the first hour. I'm not quite ready to go in there yet. And I'd rather you kind of you guys do your thing, and that way when you take me in there, you have already been in there because open casket, right? Because he hung himself, he didn't shoot himself, so able to have an open casket. And so anyway, man, I went on the way there. I went and bought a bunch of beers, like the beer of choice for like the half a dozen of us that were in the room, plus Graham's beer of choice, and then a couple of the boys that couldn't be there, their beer of choice. So we kind of had missing man formation for the guys that couldn't be in the room with us. Anyway, so the guy that runs the funeral home, man, he comes in and we're in there like literally, dude, we're laughing and joking, like just having a good old time because we're like we've already been crying for fucking weeks at this point, right? Talking about the good old days, man, telling funny ass Graham stories. So one of the funny stories that came up while we were in there was Kurt Butler, who was Graham and I's roommate in San Diego for part of that time. And Kurt was also my roommate in Guam when Graham was our neighbor. So like very small circle of dudes, right? Very interconnected. So anyway, so Kurt one day when we got control and we sat at the bar, which was behind the couch, and we were just going to watch the show, watch him just how hard is he going to smash this remote control button when he can't get the commercials off. And then he figures out there's no batteries in there, and he's like chasing us around the house with a freaking stick, trying to beat us to death, Anyway, so again, back to the memorial service. So we're sitting in there. So Kurt pulls out of his pocket a remote control it takes the 2 batteries that like came with it included, throws those in the trash, and puts this remote control with no batteries in the casket, right? And then we took like the bottle caps and put those in the casket from the beers we had drank. And then I had gone by McDonald's and gotten like 4 ketchup packets and stuck 4 McDonald's ketchup packets in the casket, right? So the funeral director guy comes in and we're in there laughing our asses off, and we're all in our dress blues and cutting it up, and he's like, gentlemen, this is a somber place, whatever. And one of the other guys that was in there was like, hey bro, this isn't the time. We're not making a mess in here. Go on about your business. And so he just kind of closed the door and left, and anyway, so fast forward, now we're done. Our initial hour is up. It's time to bring his widow by this point now in there. So I said, hey, you ready to go in? She says, yep. I said, all right, man. Here's the deal though. When you get up to the casket, you're gonna be crying and stuff. When you look inside, don't get mad, but we put some items in there for him to take on the trip. And she's like, oh Jesus, okay. So I take her up to the casket, and she's doing her thing, obviously super emotional, but she looks down in the casket and she sees the remote control and the ketchup packets, and she literally just starts laughing, dude. And so we're like, mission accomplished, right? And then after that, everybody else came in, and so I think it was the next day we were doing the thing down in Coronado, and so the family had asked me to kind of, I don't want to call it do the eulogy, but say some words, man, on Graham's behalf, So I did, and so again at this point I'm going through Chiefs initiation. So I'm a first, right? I'm in my dress blue Cracker Jacks up there, and like Graham was a fixture, man, in San Diego. Like he was like the best dude at everything, right? Like he's the dude you hate at the mobile unit because you're never gonna get a better eval than that dude. You're never gonna be at work before he is. You're never gonna leave after him. He was just the perfect EOD tech, right? And like a good sailor too, right? Like most of us EOD guys are terrible sailors, especially back then. And so anyway, completely blubbering all over the place. And we get done, man. And so there was a guy that comes up to me. He was a commander. I think he was like the CO of the VSW unit. But he was an EOD guy, but he'd also been a SEAL, I think. I might have that a little bit mixed up in my head. But anyhow, man, he comes up and he's like, hey man, that was awesome. Like glad to meet you. Sorry for your bro, passing away, but thanks for keeping the room together, and I'm taking this all in again. Like I'm this chief select, and now I'm engaged, and my best friend's dead, and like kind of the weight of the world was like I imagined it on my shoulders. It really wasn't. I was just another dude in there that was sad because our friend died, right? But for me, I probably took that a little more personal. Um, and anyway, man, so the next, was it that day? It might have been that night. I can't remember. His wife, or widow Annie at the time, she hosted everybody up at their house, up in Alpine, which is out like that's an hour from Coronado, And anyhow, man, we just had a bunch of folks showed up, and it was just drinking and eating and telling lies and funny stories about Graham, and a little shoulder on shoulder crying and stuff. But the guy, so my friend Kirk Butler, who I looked up to, not only as a big brother, because he's literally almost exactly 4 years older than me. Also as a leader, right? Like Kurt was like the bull E5 when I was a new E5. Kurt was the bull E6 when I was a new E6. Kurt made chief and was still living in the house and was like counseling me at the house, like, "Hey man, this is what you need to do." And I'm like, "Hey man, you can leave that chief shit at work. Like we've been roommates forever, And so anyway, Kirk was the guy that that he's one of those dudes in your life that you learn leadership lessons from. And I'll never forget this, man. We're sitting out back at Graham's house, and they had like a good chunk of property, man, probably like an acre or so. And just he and I were out sitting on a rock. Huh, hang on, dude, hold that thought, because I just found, or I not say found, I just happened to look over and see. I just got to get it out of this box. So pertinent to the story. So again, I'm making chief, right? Kurt's already been a chief for a while, and he's like, "Hey, dude, I got you something for making chief, and it's a flask, right?" So, and he had it engraved and stuff, and so he hands it to me, and he looks me dead in the eye, man, and he says, "Hey, man, that shit you did today at the memorial service, that's leadership stuff that they can't teach you at chief's initiation. That's you already know more about leadership than a lot of folks do just by doing that today, and don't ever forget that experience and how that is going to develop you as a leader moving forward." And he was serious to heart attack. I mean, Kurt and I, we've had a lot of good, funny, happy times together, but he wasn't joking. He looked me dead in the eye and told me that. And so I always remember that moment in time when he gave me the flask and kind of passed those words of advice / encouragement on to me, man. And that period of my life, it fundamentally changed me. Right, I was just like the happy-go-lucky party it, burn it down all night, dude. And then moving forward from that, I had this gaping hole in my guts, like everybody else did. And like I said, I took it very personal, and I told myself I was going to do everything I could to not have somebody else, if at all possible, feel that same thing, man. So it kind of took, before we knew what suicide awareness and some of the adverse effects to not getting help with your mental health were, right? Because this is '02. We didn't know shit about this back then. But I took it personally, man, and kind of made it my mission to do everything I could to hopefully not have folks feel what I felt, man. And so, like, when you ask about that for kind of one of those memorable moments, man, that was a huge turning point in my life, both personally and professionally.
It's interesting when I should say how a terrible situation can be a pivotal moment for good, as opposed to something that sends you in a bad path. And that's awesome to hear that you took that terrible situation. No other ways to say that, but and made it a purposeful endeavor that can help others. It's good, man.
Yeah, man. It's and it's as you know, man. I mean, you've been around the community long enough, man. And right up until recently, I mean, we're still losing dudes. A lot of them, once they retire or get out or whatever, but we're still having dudes losing through suicide and stuff. And even like for you talk about mental toughness and mental health, right? Like those are two sides of the coin, right? And if you can balance those, then you're good. Most of us can't. You know, um, and because it's got to be one or the other, because we don't equate those two as mutually supportive. Or I certainly didn't. I don't want to lump everybody else my into my mess, but for me, I mean, shit, dude, I went until I had my first mental health appointment in like 2019 or maybe 2020. I'm trying to think about this. 2019, I had my
Yeah.
first mental health thing, and Graham died in '02, right? So, like, imagine the head shrinker trying to unpack that after, almost 20 years of compartmentalization. And then compound that with all the other dudes that died since that, not only suicide, but our battlefield casualties and our dudes that just died in accidents, motorcycle
Right.
wrecks or some sort of crazy health related thing. Um, and that's why I was when I was looking through the questionnaire, man, and like it just kind of hit me. I'm like, yeah, man, like I don't know things that part in kind of determining how you are moving forward, and fortunately for me, I was able to kind of get through that with a lot of help from a lot of other dudes and family and friends and stuff, and to do what I was able to do with the rest of my time, in the military. After, like many of us, suffering some close inner circle tragedies, and
Yeah.
yeah, man. So that's I don't know. You ask about a moment, that's a moment right there, man.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. You mentioned the um, mental toughness, and like uh, how it's not the same thing as your mental health, right? And I 100% with you on that, because I
Yep.
viewed for a long time, really agreed, like up until recently when I started, going to the psych, and I don't care who knows, I think it's actually super important to let people know that
100%,
you
dude.
don't have to let them know what you're talking about in there, but
Nope.
letting people know that you're going, and that yeah, and it's not it, it's not a bad thing, but I used to equate like being mentally tough with kind of probably the same thing as you. Like something bad happens, and I'm like, cool, catalog that, put it back there, never
Yep.
think about it again, moving on. And and like, okay, I'm tough. It's not going to bother me. Well, it turns out, I was actually just talking to a couple people just a few days ago about this. How, um, man, it wasn't even the Navy. Things from beforehand, family members
Yep.
passing, and friends passing from before the Navy, and then everything that's happened in the Navy and beyond. Um, I barely shed tears a long time ago, and just recently, I'm realizing, man, I wasn't actually being mentally tough. I was just straight up, like you said, compartmentalizing, and it turns out eventually those compartments start opening, and man, I start talking about people I don't know, or even just seeing stuff on TV now, that's sad. And before I'd be like, tough, move on. And man, I start watering, start thinking about it. I'm like, okay, maybe I should probably start dealing with some of these things, because it, it's two separate things. Like dealing with it is a health side. The, what I used to think as mentally tough is just literally straight up not dealing
100%,
with
bro.
it. It's, yeah,
100%, man. I
I don't know.
there's so many guys, man, that 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 haven't got there yet, and Lord knows most of them probably need at least something or somebody within their circle or otherwise, medically qualified or otherwise, to just be that safety check valve, man, and kind of just bleed off some of that pressure if they can, and until like 2019. And
Yeah.
one of the guys, as soon as I got out, man, like I'd been retired maybe shit, man, like maybe 2 months, and one of my good bros there in Virginia Beach, suffered a terrible tragedy, and lost his better half, man. Um, you know, to some health related issues. And I was out in the middle of a camping trip when it happened, and I couldn't just get like I couldn't teleport home, man. And I had my little dude with me, and I called him up, and I was like, "Hey, man, I can't get there right now.
Right.
I'm sorry. I, it'll be a couple weeks before I can get home and get him, you know, have my wife take care of him, and then I'll get reloaded, and I'll be there as quick as I can, and in hindsight, it actually worked out, right? Because right when it happened, he had, everybody and their brother in Bob Beach was able to be there for the initial shock of it all and kind of shore him up. And, it was probably a month after she had passed by the time I got there, or maybe a couple weeks, whatever it was. It wasn't the next day, but I was able to spend, my wife took care of my son and the house and stuff for like a month. And I was able to spend a
Yeah.
month there with him. And, we had a lot of big discussions around I think he calls it's like the table of truth or the truth table or something in his house, man. And so at that point, I was just getting into like the VA healthcare thing, And when I got out, COVID was going on, so a lot of the health stuff leading up to me retiring was all shut down because they didn't know like this was like literally I retired like maybe a month after the actual lockdown happened, you know. So anyway, he was one of the
Yeah.
guys that really finally like kind of hammered into me like, hey dude, you have got to go unpackage all this compartmentalized bullshit that's in your head, and you'll feel better. And I was kind of resisted it, and then sure as shit, we were sitting around the table one night, and I just freaking had a meltdown, dude, like terrible, right? Like I looked like a 3-year-old. Somebody just stole their ice cream, you know. And he was like, "Okay, bro, that's what I'm talking about. See, now you feel better." And so I literally got back from his house, and the VA called me, and I went in for my intake appointment. And my care team, she was like, "Hey man, what's the top 3 things that you didn't get fixed before you got out, or adversely affecting you right now?" And I was like, "Hey, here's my 3 things." Mental health was at the top of the list because I had just started scratching the surface before um, COVID and all that stuff kind of started happening, and I just wasn't able to continue the care. And so she got me like immediately interviewed, and then within a couple months of being home from his house, I was in, one day a week, 2 hours on the VA's version of Zoom, doing appointments with the head shrinker, man, and unpacking all this stuff. And I did it was like a 16-week what do they call it, cognitive processing therapy, man. And man, I tell you, like, had it not been for my good bro there in Virginia Beach, really hammering at me, I don't know if I would have just bought right into it, man. But to see him having gone through literally the worst effing thing ever,
Yeah.
um, and then to see how he was able to process it and to be able to use some of the stuff that he learned from his experience going through mental health stuff, and it just made me a believer, man. And I promised him that I promised him I would do it, so I did. And I'm better for it, and I thank him for it every time I see him.
Yeah, I think sometimes that that is what it takes. It just takes somebody that we trust being like, "Hey, man, you need these resources. It's not just magic,
Nope.
and it's not evil either. It'll actually help." And then,
Yep, that's a fact, man.
um,
That is a fact.
so some of the things you um, talked about and whatnot is just kind of um, that kind of like go throughout your career too, as I kind of listen to it, um, and and then I kind of think back on the questionnaire, some of the stuff you put on there. You put you know being part of the team, leading and following, and like both sides of it. Not just not just on the team member side, and not just on the leadership of the team side, but both sides. How is that kind of played out through your career?
Yeah, man. I mean, again, because I was fortunate enough to where I was part of the EOD community my entire adult life, right? Like, um, from time I think I was 19, maybe, but when I checked in Mobile Unit 1, and I was whatever 50 when I retired, right? Like, it was like my entire adult life, I was part of this amazing close knit group of guys and gals, and to be able to have been stationed with, some of these folks over the years several times, and even when you're not stationed with them, you still stay in touch with them. And then, like you said before, you have these terrible things,
Mhm.
and it's almost like they're more galvanizing than any of the good stuff. It's all fun and games when you're sitting around the campfire drinking beers, and everybody likes to talk about that, but it's all the memorial services and when we're crying on each other's shoulders and throwing empty tequila bottles in the fire, pissed off, that help for me even forge even more deeply how important that brotherhood is. And it's a double-edged sword. You got these guys that are in your inner circle that you trust not only your life with, but like all your other important stuff, right? Like your family and your something happens to you, and like
Yeah.
one of these guys is going to be the dude that comes and grabs your kid for 2 weeks in the summer one time and takes him fishing. You know what I mean? And so with that brotherhood, it's awesome because you know that you have that not safety net, man, just that close knit group to support each other. And then on the flip side of that coin is, you lose one of those guys, and then you're like, oh fuck, it just hurts that much more because you're so intertwined with them. And it's like the circle loses a chunk, and then it like naturally like a cell, it just reforms into a tighter circle because, well, there's less people now, but now you're even bonded even more due to tragedy. And then maybe you lose another guy that's on one of the electron rings, and those guys get a little more closer, and eventually one of those dudes is going to have to pop into the middle circle to fill a gap, and so you talk about talking about the brotherhood and being a part of the team, and then having had the opportunity to experience being part of the team from, hey, new guy, take the trash out, and you're like, shit, I'm taking the trash out, or hey, you're going to work in a mess cranking for, a couple weeks or whatever on the ship, and you're like, man, this sucks, and then you realize, the mess cranks have the most important job on the ship because without them, nobody eats, right? So we can't, we can go a while without eating, but not long. And you just find your place in the team. Get in where you fit in, man, and then later on in life, well, now you're in charge, and then you have like the burden of responsibility and accountability. And I say that it's a privilege to
Yeah.
have that, but it's an absolute burden because all you think about every day is I have to do everything right to do the best I can so that I don't get any of these guys, you know, negligently injured or killed. I mean, bad shit happens, and we all know that in combat, man. But it's it's not always combat, man. Sometimes it's a guy freaking gets in a car wreck because he was out boozing it up because he didn't go to mental health because he didn't want to, and he was self medicating, and nobody knew because nobody was paying attention. And so I talk about that, that burden of leadership. That's your burden, man, is to know everybody and make sure you know your team as a team leader as well as you did as a team member. You knew what everybody ate every day because you took out the trash every day, right? When you're when you're
Yeah.
the E4 on the team, that's how it works. So you get that bottom up, top down, and hopefully over time, if you're fortunate like I was to be able to have served across those different types of positions, it's it's what it's all about. And then, like I said, that brotherhood, man. I mean, there's guys that were carrying Graham Lindsley's coffin and putting it in the damn hearse machine. I'll be up canoeing the boundary waters with one of those guys. Like 3 weeks from right now, dude. And that's since 2000. And he
That's
called me out of the
awesome.
blue, and we hooked back up. And me and my boy are driving up there in a couple weeks, and we're gonna go spend a week canoeing on the boundary water, man. So that's that brotherhood. That's that teamwork I'm talking about, man.
That'd be cool. That's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Um, something that I think is interesting, and I'd not been in this position where I've had to do this before, but talking about mental health and it is like I agree. It's a privilege to lead, but it is a burden. Like because you have to take care of yourself, but then you have to make sure that everybody else is taken care of too. And sometimes and recently, and I even told the person exactly what I said, but um, one of my people had a problem, and dude, I was maxed. Like I was maxed with home, with work, with everything. Like I could not mentally do much more without like losing something, And I hated to say it, but I got the other leaders that were on the team, and it's like, hey, I I am maxed. I straight up told them, which I think is something that is important for us to do, right? When we're in a position, um, let everybody know where we stand, right?
Hmm.
But I told them I was like, hey, I'm at a point where I need to know what legally I have to do, and I literally can't do more than that. Like I'm not saying like I hope you guys have more bandwidth, but right now I don't, and like it sucks to be in that point, but because I know that like I want to be able to do everything for all of the people that are under me and around me, not just under me, all people to the side and above me too. But sometimes we can't, and sometimes when we do, even when we can't, man, it really it causes problems later on too. But
Yep.
it's I don't know. It's just it's a weird thing. I think it's important to understand for everybody, because sometimes we want to pretend that it's not a burden, but it is, and it's not. It doesn't mean it's a burden's not always a bad thing. A burden can be very beneficial, right? Like the
Yep.
fact that I have that burden and can use that to help influence people to go in the right direction, make something better for themselves, whether it's personally or professionally. Like that's a good burden. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah, man. It's you know, talk about burdens, right? And you quit like an analogy, right? And then I'll give you a sea story, so to speak, to back it up if we still got time. But the analogy of, like you said, right, burdens can be good too, right? You get used to running your 5K with your kit on, then one day you have to run a 5K with no kit, and it's not you're not even sweating, right? Even my old fat ass would be barely sweating if I, assuming I could
Yeah.
actually still fit in my kit. But my point of that is, you talk about the burdens, right, and the burden of leadership, and so I will tell you, if we got do we got I don't want to jam you up for too much time, but if you got time, so uh
Yeah, I got
the
time.
Commodore that I talked about that I was first working for, and he's like I said, some people like him, some people don't. I just happened to be in the camp that liked that guy, and when he was in command, they had some pretty heavy casualties in Iraq, and to this day that hangs around his neck, um, in a way that you know nobody can understand unless they were in that position, right? And so
Yeah.
not long after he had transferred from Rhoda, probably maybe a year or so, maybe 2 years, whatever it was. But you know, we had just had my boy was like 4 months old, and I was just burnt out, man. Not just he was the easiest thing in my life at that point. Work was just crushing my soul, man. And so my wife was like, "Hey, man, you need to go chill out and do something for a couple weeks." And she recommended going up and hiking the Camino de Santiago, where you cross over from France into Spain, and you kind of hike this long trek, and it's like a 600-mile thing. But I didn't have that kind of time because it takes like 30 or 40 days, but I did have a couple weeks. So I was like, shit, man, I mapped out the thing, and she kind of helped me with it. And so I mapped out like about a 200-mile thing. And it's not like you're hiking 200 miles and like sleeping on a rock. You know what I mean? You stay in like little hostels and stuff, and it's
Yeah.
just a cool experience. And so anyway, there's a spot like I don't know, man, like probably 175 miles into this thing, 180 miles into this thing, and there's like this pile of rocks, and there's a big cross there, and like the whole thing is when you get there, you you take a rock out of your pack and you leave that at the cross, and it's like you're taking a burden and you're leaving it there, and then of course your pack is physically lighter as well, and then your
Mm.
hopefully your mental pack is a little lighter too, right? So um I don't remember what I was thinking that day, man, but I was I was only going to go about 12 miles and lay up, but the weather was turning crappy, but I was feeling good, and I had these rocks in my pack, and one of them was for that Commodore that I was talking about, and because I knew the burden that he carried, and in my mind I could lessen his burden just a little bit, right? So I get to the pile and I grab the rock
Mm.
out, and I'm like, all right, and I had three rocks, and so I throw the rock up there, and and there's thousands of rocks on this pile, dude. It's like, I mean, this cross is like 20, 30 feet high, and this like pile of rocks probably goes up the first 8 feet of this cross. Anyway, man, I throw this rock on there, and I'm watching as it's tumbling down, and then it falls right in between these two other rocks. And I was like, man, and I was, I think I was 2 days late to the anniversary of when the three guys were killed in the same vehicle. And my plan was to originally have gotten there on the day to do. And anyway, so when I threw that first one up there and it nested in between those other two, I was like, man, that's perfect. Like there's the three rocks right there. So I took the other two out and set them down, but I didn't want to disturb the pile. And I took a picture of it, man. And then instead of stopping that day, because now it's raining out and stuff, but I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just gonna hike it all the way into Burgos, man. And so I humped another probably 12 miles, dude. And because I think it's almost 40 clicks that day total. And so I get into town, and saw a Heineken sign hanging, and my feet were killing me. So I rolled in there, still had my pack, didn't even check into my hotel, and started drinking some Heineken. The lady asked me where I come from, and I told her, and she's like, "Oh my God, that's a long ways." I'm like, "Yeah, well, had to stop along the way." She said, "You stopped at the cross," and I said, "Yeah," and I was, talking to her in Spanish, obviously, but she understood what I was saying, and it was cool, right? So then, fast forward, I get home and I get these pictures, and I like couldn't figure out a cool way to do it other than to like put it into like a quad slide that he would understand. So I did this and kind of told him the story of how I got there, and sorry I was late, didn't get there for the anniversary, but here's your rock, man, and here's where it fell in between these other three, and this is for the three guys, and blah blah blah. And I sent it to him, man. And I still have the email he sent back to me, and it was pretty special. Emotional for sure, but also pretty special to have had the opportunity to, for 1 minute in time, lessen his burden of command that takes, as most
Yeah.
commanders do, takes very seriously. And and he and I, we still joke about it now, and it was one of those things that it just further cemented that you know professional relationship as well as personal relationship. And now neither of us are in the Navy, so now we can actually be pals and hang out and drink freaking bourbon together and smoke
Yeah.
cigars and not have to have somebody you know policing us up and giving us some business about the senior chief and the
Right.
Commodore hanging out drinking scotch. So anyway, man, you talking about the burden and how it can be a good thing, and that story popped in my head. I
Yeah.
didn't even write that shit down. I should have wrote that on the damn form. But anyway, that was that's what popped in my head when you were talking about how it can be a good thing. The burden of leadership. So yeah,
No, that's cool. I think, man, it, your wife's smart. Get you out of the house, get you doing something physical to like bring you back. That's uh,
yep,
that helps. And like those, whether it's someone else making you suffer or you suffering, sometimes a lot of clarity comes from that. Like all the other stuff kind of
sir.
drowns away, and you're able to really think through some stuff and get through. That's awesome. Well, I mean, we
Yeah,
didn't
man,
even really
it was
touch on
a
your
very unique opportunity.
uh, um, Yeah. We didn't even really touch on detailer time except for kind of like sporadically throughout. Because you retired out of the detailer job, right?
Yeah, well, I actually I turned over with Chuck, and then they asked me to stay for an extra. It turned out to be like an extra 8 months or something to just help out on the recruiting side because the naval recruiting command is also on the same base where the detailers are and stuff. So we talked with the
Mm.
captain about it, and Admiral Brackey, you know, blessed off on me staying, uh, past 30 to spend a little bit of time, and so that I was actually in the recruiting office, but just kind of just helping out where I could, man. I was basically done when I finished the detailer job, and then I spent 4 months basically helping out over on the recruiting side where I could, and then that was about the time when COVID was starting to spin up, and then the rest is history. But yeah, the detailer job that was my last real job, man.
Yeah, nice. I've heard Tennessee. I've been around there a little bit, and I've heard it's a pretty nice place. And people tend to enjoy it, even though it's a good place to have a very stressful job. Because I've heard the extracurriculars, just that the nature is actually pretty good.
Yeah, man, it's I kind of got back into camping, when we moved here, and my boy was about at that age. He was like 5 or whatever, so he was kind of getting into it, and so he's like quite the little camping dude. He's got his own little kayak and his fishing poles, and he loves to go out camping
Nice.
with me and stuff. And been fortunate enough to have had the opportunity over the last couple summers, not last summer, but the previous couple summers, to do some long extended 4, 5, 6 week camping trips with him. And then we're getting ready to leave on another one. And for me, you talk about kind of finding that balance in life, or finding that outlet. And turns out like being out in the woods kind of is that outlet for me. So I'm just going to keep doing it as long as
Yeah,
I can, and hopefully, he'll stick with it for until he turns into a teenager and wants to do other stuff. But I'm gonna keep taking him with me as long as he's willing to do it, man.
that's awesome. My oldest is 6 right now, and we so far we haven't done like real camping, like legit camping. We do the travel trailer
Right.
camping, but the goal
Yep.
is that to use that as the hub so the wife can
Yep.
be comfortable, and then we take
Yep.
off after that. But
That's
that's the goal.
exactly it,
So
man. That's the same thing with us. I had myself for my retirement gift to myself. I had a like kind of like a teardrop sort of small, mini. It's almost like a trailer, tent
okay,
on wheels sort of thing, and I had that built by a guy out in Oklahoma, and I picked it up right after I retired. And so we take that, and that's like you're talking about using that as a hub. And now that my little dude's getting a little bigger, this winter, this fall coming up, we're going to take. There's a couple of the state parks around here where you can set up kind of the base camp with power and access to a hot shower and a bathroom, and then you can hike out to like the primitive sites that are only a couple miles away. And so he'll be big enough to tote his own ruck, and we'll go up there for a couple days to the primitive site, and then come back to the hub, as needed, and then pack it up. So
yeah,
it'll be cool, man. So yeah, totally on board with what you're talking about. Getting that travel trailer, have Mama be as comfortable as possible, and then taking that little human out
yeah,
for a little bit, little additional experience.
exactly. Um, so I like to kind of end things with if you have something that you would like to, I don't know, either say to like Navy EOD specifically, or the community in general, or just like any kind of like lasting things that you got, if you have anything.
Yeah, man, I do, man. There's kind of three rules, right? Like rule number one, bad language out of it, but don't be a jerk. Substitute that with whatever bad word you want to, but don't be that guy. You never know what's going on. You know, you don't have to be. an asshole to get resolution, man. So like I said, rule number one, man, don't be an asshole if you don't have to be. And then the other two things, man, are just like kind of those things that I look to expect in myself, and then hoped over time when I was in those positions of leadership to instill in the folks I had the privilege to lead. And those two things are simple, man: humility and loyalty. Right? Be humble. We all know that Navy EOD guys are pretty tough dudes. They're pretty smart dudes and dudettes, and they do a pretty tough job, and it can be super rewarding, and it can also have catastrophic. Everybody, how badass you are. That's probably cool, but by the time you're 30, you should be able to let people know how badass you are by your actions and not your words, man. You know, so humility's that thing, man, and then loyalty. Loyal to the team, man. Loyal to whatever your circle is, man. Some guys say, well, you loyalty to the Navy first, and then the community, and then your platoon or whatever. That's not me, man. Be loyal to what is close to you, man. Because when it all goes to shit, it's not the Navy and the community necessarily that are picking you up, man. It's that inner circle of your team or your inner circle of friends or brothers or family or whatever that is, man. So be loyal to that, because the Navy, they'll provide 6 strangers to carry your coffin at the end of the day, right? If that's what your family wants. But if you're lucky enough to have 6 folks that you didn't that you stayed loyal to, man, they might be able to get on that plane and make that walk to support your family when you need it. So that's what I'd say, man. Don't be an asshole. Be humble and be loyal to what's important to you, whatever that is.
Well, I appreciate it. That's solid advice. I appreciate you coming on and talking about your career and just your thoughts and stuff. I enjoy sitting down and, like I said, I had a very, very small meeting with you. So this is good. I actually get to know you a little bit, get to know something about you. And I appreciate spending the time to allow me that.
No, man, I appreciate what you're doing. I was hooked. I probably listened to 10 minutes of Trevor's that initial podcast, man, when you had Dude Maxwell on there. And, I texted him as soon as I finished listening to his thing. And I was like, hey, man, reach out to him if he's got, if he needs any old freaking retired, former action guys to chime in and tell their story. I'm more than happy to try and help the effort out, man. It's great. I love what you're doing, man. And it's in this day and age, it's not sitting around the command training table and looking at some stupid PowerPoint for an hour and getting online to doing some stupid online course. Not that some of them don't have value, they do, but folks these days, they learn differently. If they could put some freaking old dude on in the podcast while they're stuck in traffic for an hour commuting, around Virginia Beach traffic or wherever they're stationed at, man, and that helps one dude out or one dudette, then I call that a win, man.
Absolutely. Completely agree. Yeah. And the side benefit is that turns out I'm freaking loving doing this. So I get a little bit of selfish satisfaction on it. And then, yeah, I just get to share it with as many as possible. But yeah, super appreciate it. Man, I'm if I ever make it out to Tennessee, I'll have to look you up and say hi in person.
Yeah, man, I'm only I'm 10 miles off of I-40 right before you hit Arkansas, man. So but I'll probably be in Virginia Beach before you're in Tennessee. So I'll hit you up next time I'm in town to have a few beers with the boys, and I'll let you know when I'm coming. And then we can link up for a beer or coffee or whatever your schedule allows for. That'd be great.
Absolutely. Sounds awesome. All right. Well, I will talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to the Echo Oscar Delta podcast, where we talk to Navy EOD techs and hear the stories that they want to share.